Something about this season feels unusually quiet, and that is exactly why you must pay attention. The final test is not arriving with thunder in the sky, not with a dramatic collapse, not with an obvious battle that announces itself from far away. It is arriving softly, almost respectfully dressed, in something small enough to be ignored by anyone who still thinks destiny is only decided in public moments of greatness. But for the chosen one, heaven often works differently. The most decisive moments rarely look impressive while they are happening. They come disguised as delay you did not expect, a silence you do not enjoy, a temptation to react, a private irritation, a minor disappointment, or a simple instruction that seems too small to matter. Yet what happens next in your life may be determined by how you handle that one subtle moment. Because God does not only measure what you do when everyone is watching, He measures what you do when the room is quiet, when the choice is small, when the pressure is hidden, when the only witness seems to be your own heart. That is where the real weight is being tested. That is where obedience becomes visible in the spirit. That is where doors are opened or delayed. So do not rush past this word. Stay with it carefully, because the smallest test often guards the biggest promotion, and what looks ordinary is maybe carrying eternal significance for your next season. If this message speaks directly to your spirit, subscribe, like, and comment. I will not fail the small test, because sometimes a simple act of agreement becomes the first step of alignment. The reason God uses small tests before big promotion is because small moments tell the truth about you in ways that large declarations never can. It is easy to speak bravely about calling purpose, faith, disciplines, and obedience when nothing is pressing against your emotions. It is easy to sound ready for the mantle when the moment is still theoretical. But heaven does not entrust greater weight to speeches alone. It watches for steadiness in ordinary places. It looks for the way you carry a quiet delay, the way you handle an unseen frustration, the way you obey when the instruction feels unimpressive, the way you respond when there is no applause attached to your faithfulness. This is because large mantles cannot safely rest on unstable hearts. If God were to release the next level of responsibility before the inner structure was ready, the blessing itself could become a burden. So He tests gently before He trusts greatly. He lets the chosen one pass through small assignments, quiet waiting rooms, hidden inconveniences, and ordinary acts of obedience, because those are the places where restraint, humility, patience, and character become visible without performance. A public platform can hide pride for a while, but a private delay exposes it. A big opportunity can temporarily energize obedience, but a small repetitive instruction reveals whether obedience is truly rooted in love or only in excitement. That is why heaven cares so deeply about what you do with little things. Little things expose whether your heart is settled or still restless for attention. They reveal whether you honor God only when the task feels important, or whether you honor Him because He asked. And there is a sacred difference between those two states. One is still attached to spectacle, the other is ready for stewardship. The chosen one must understand that many of the greatest transitions in life are preceded by moments that feel almost beneath notice. Moses had wilderness years before public leadership. David learned faithfulness in fields before he entered palaces. Joseph carried integrity and hidden pain before authority ever touched his hands. In each case, the greater responsibility was preceded by seasons that did not look impressive, but were doing the invisible engineering required to hold what was coming next. This is how God works. He often prepares you in places that do not flatter your ego, because He is not only building skill, He is building capacity. He is teaching you how to carry weight without becoming swollen with pride, how to endure delay without collapsing into self-pity, how to obey without needing constant validation. The small test is not small because it lacks meaning. It is small because it slips past the ego and lands directly on the heart. And that is where God wants the truth. He wants to know whether you can keep your spirit aligned when the task is simple, when the reward is invisible, when the instruction is quiet, when the irritation is low enough that you could easily justify the wrong reaction. Because if you can honor Him there, then you are proving something far greater than outward strength. You are proving inner government. You are showing that you do not need pressure to become holy for 5 minutes. You're becoming someone whose default posture is alignment. And once you understand that, another sobering truth begins to unfold, because the final test often does not look like a test at all. This is why so many people miss it. They are waiting for a giant showdown, a dramatic temptation, a clearly labeled spiritual battle, and instead the decisive moment arrives wearing ordinary clothes. It may come as a small irritation in the middle of your day, a brief disappointment you did not plan for, a moment of silence where you expected reassurance, a missed opportunity that bruises your pride, a conversation that tempts you to say too much, or a private moment where you are invited to choose between patience and reaction. Nothing about it seems large enough to qualify as destiny shaping, and that's precisely what makes it dangerous. The enemy wants you to dismiss little moments, because little moments are where patterns stay hidden. He prefers the chosen one to say it's no big deal while something deeply important is being measured in the spirit. He wants you to overlook the weight of a small compromise, a tiny resentment, a careless tone, a delayed act of obedience, or a seemingly harmless reaction, because what is ignored becomes easier to repeat. God, meanwhile, is watching closely, not because He is trying to trap you, but because He is finishing the last work of refinement before the door opens. The final test may not be wrapped in drama, because drama would make you alert too early. A dramatic test would activate all your spiritual language and all your practice discipline. But a small ordinary test reveals what is truly living inside you when the instinct takes over. It reveals whether your healing is deep or only verbal, whether your humility is stable or still fragile, whether your obedience is mature or still dependent on emotional convenience. That is why the final test can appear almost laughably minor on the outside while carrying enormous weight beneath the surface. It may be one extra delay after a long season of waiting. It may be one more chance to stay silent when you feel misunderstood. It may be one invitation to let go of control instead of forcing a result. It may be one quiet disappointment that tempts you to question God's timing. It may be a tiny inconvenience that touches a place in you thought was already healed. And in that moment, heaven is not merely watching the inconvenience, it is watching your response to it. The chosen one often imagines that the final confirmation of readiness will come through something heroic, but many times it comes through something unimpressive. A closed door for one more week, a text that never arrives, a person who fails to acknowledge your effort, a correction you did not expect, a situation that gives you the chance to become petty, proud, bitter, reactive, or controlling. The moment seems ordinary, almost too ordinary, and yet it contains the entire question. Are you really ready to carry what you have been asking for? Because readiness is not proven only by how high you can rise. It is proven by how well you remain aligned when nothing around you seems grand enough to deserve a strong response. This is why the chosen one must become deeply attentive in this season. Stop despising small moments. Stop assuming that only the obvious battles matter. Stop thinking that because something feels emotionally minor, it carries no spiritual consequence. The final test often passes by quietly, and only later do you realize that a single restrained reaction, a single obedient pause, a single act of trust in an ordinary moment unlocked a season you had been waiting years to enter. And from there, the deepest layer becomes visible, because what is being tested may be hidden less in the event itself and more in your reaction to it. This is where many chosen ones receive the clearest revelation. The issue is not always what happens to you. The issue is what rises out of you when it does. One careless reaction can expose what still needs refining. One bitter word can reveal that old pain still has roots. One impulsive choice can show that impatience still has access to the steering wheel. One proud response can uncover the ego is still negotiating with your obedience. This does not mean you are disqualified because you feel pressure. It means pressure tells the truth. Pressure reveals whether healing is complete or whether old patterns are still waiting beneath the surface for the right trigger. That is why the final test may be hidden in your reaction. The circumstance itself may be small, but the response it invites is enormous. When you are delayed, do you trust or do you turn inward and sour? When you are overlooked, do you stay grounded or do you begin silently demanding recognition? When you are inconvenienced, do you remain governed or do you let irritation lead? When you are misunderstood, do you seek wisdom or do you reach for impulsive self-defense? These are not minor questions. They are spiritual X-rays. They reveal what still lives in the secret corners of the heart. The chosen one must learn that God is not only interested in external obedience, He wants inner transformation so complete that your reactions begin to reflect your healing even before your mind has time to assemble a perfect sentence. Anyone can perform maturity for a moment, but when a small pressure touches an old wound, the truth comes rushing to the surface. That is why reaction matters. It is often the most honest witness in the room. Not because feelings are evil, but because ungoverned reactions reveal where surrender is still incomplete. And this is where the final test becomes both tender and serious. Tender because God is not exposing your reaction to shame you. Serious because He loves you too much to let hidden instability travel with you into your war next season. If old patterns remain unchallenged, greater responsibility will only enlarge them. If pride remains untreated, promotion will feed it. If impatience remains unchecked, authority will magnify it. If bitterness remains alive, influence will spread it. So God allows one more moment, one more small trigger, one more ordinary inconvenience, and through it He asks a holy question: what now lives inside you? Are you still ruled by the old reflex, or has grace truly rebuilt you? This is why the final test can feel strangely personal. It touches the exact place you thought you had mastered. It brushes against the very habit you thought was gone. It reaches into the area where your growth is real, but perhaps not yet complete. And if you are wise, you will not waste that moment defending your reaction. You will study it. You will let it teach you. You will bring it before God and say, "Show me what is still unhealed, because I want nothing hidden to follow me into what you have prepared." That prayer is the posture of someone truly close to promotion. Not perfection, but honesty. Not performance, but surrender. Not pretending the reaction means nothing, but recognizing that a small reaction under pressure can reveal an entire unfinished chapter in the soul. Yet this is also hopeful, because the same reaction that exposes weakness can become the doorway to final healing. The same moment that reveals impatience can become the place where patience is chosen. The same trigger that once controlled you can become the scene of your new obedience. The same irritation that would have pulled you backward last year can become the proof that God has actually changed you. And that is the beauty hidden inside the final test. It is not just a measurement, it is an invitation. It is heaven offering you one more moment to agree with the person you have been becoming in secret. So when the small moment arrives, do not laugh it off. Do not call it nothing. Do not assume it lacks meaning just because it lacks spectacle. Stand still inside it. Listen carefully. Respond slowly. Let your spirit lead before your emotions speak, because the final test is often smaller than you think, but the door behind it is larger than you can currently see. And as this truth settles deeper into your spirit, another layer of the final test begins to reveal itself, because sometimes the decisive moment is not found in what you do, but in what you refuse to do. This is where many chosen ones feel the tension most sharply, because the flesh often mistakes motion for power, while heaven often calls restraint maturity. There will be moments when you are tempted to prove yourself, to explain yourself, to defend your name, to chase revenge with polished words, to answer every accusation, to force a door that seems almost open, to send the message, to make the call, to expose the wrong, to take control of what feels delayed. And yet the final test may be hidden in your ability to remain still, when every unhealed instinct wants to move. It may be concealed inside one moment of holy restraint, one decision not to react, one refusal to turn pain into performance. This is difficult because restraint rarely feels dramatic. It does not give your ego much to celebrate. It does not always satisfy the emotional part of you that wants instant vindication. But heaven sees enormous strength in what you resist. Anyone can move in impulse. Anyone can speak too soon. Anyone can try to bend timing with anxiety. But not everyone can hold their peace when misunderstood, keep their dignity when provoked, or let God defend what they are tempted to defend themselves. That kind of restraint is not weakness. It is weight-bearing maturity. It proves that your spirit is no longer ruled by every internal storm. It shows that you are becoming trustworthy with greater influence, because you do not need to use force every time discomfort appears. The chosen one must understand that one of the most powerful words in any final season is no. No, I will not chase what God did not tell me to chase. No, I will not open my mouth just because silence feels uncomfortable. No, I will not prove my worth to people who were never assigned to discern it. No, I will not force a result that requires divine timing to become beautiful. No, I will not let my wound write the next line of my story. These refusals may look small from the outside, but in the spirit they are massive. They are proof that old reflexes are losing control. They are evidence that healing is no longer theoretical. There are times when the most anointed thing you can do is nothing visible at all, because heaven is measuring not your activity but your government. Can you sit with the delayed answer without manufacturing your own? Can you bear being misread without collapsing into self-justification? Can you endure not being chosen by the wrong room because you trust the right room is still ahead? This is where many destinies are clarified, not in loud action, but in sacred restraint. And once you see that, the next layer becomes even more humbling, because the final test may also arrive through a tiny act of obedience that looks almost too simple to matter. One small instruction from God can carry more weight than years of ambitious striving. That is what makes this season so holy and so easy to mishandle. The instruction may not flatter your intellect. It may not look strategic. It may not feel large enough to explain the intensity of what you have been through. Yet one whisper from heaven can contain the key that all your effort could never produce on its own. You may be asked to apologize when your pride wants to stay justified. You may be asked to stay silent when you have built a whole speech in your mind. You may be asked to walk away from something that still tugs at your emotions. You may be asked to wait longer when you already feel stretched thin. You may be asked to forgive quietly without announcement, without the other person earning it in the way your pain wanted. You may be asked to release something emotionally precious, something you had secretly hoped to keep, something that had become familiar enough to feel like part of your identity. And because the act is small, the temptation is to underestimate it. But this is how heaven often works. The doorway is enormous while the key is tiny. The ocean moves because of a narrow tide. A giant gate swings because of a small hinge. Whole seasons shift because one person obeys in a moment that looked too unimpressive to carry much power. This is why the chosen one must stop measuring obedience by size. It is not the size of the act that gives it weight. It is the source of the instruction. If God is in it, then it carries more consequence than your eyes can currently see. Simple obedience can unlock what years of self-generated effort could not, because obedience aligns you with divine flow, while striving often keeps you trapped in self-reliance. Many chosen ones have prayed for acceleration while resisting the one small instruction attached to it. They want the door, but heaven is watching whether they will let go of the handle they were told to release. They want confirmation, but God is waiting to see whether they will obey without needing another sign. They want promotion, but the final key may be hidden in a quiet act of surrender that no one else will ever know about. This is why the small instruction matters so much. It is never just about the action itself, it is about agreement. Will you trust God enough to obey when the act feels beneath the scale of your expectation? Will you honor His wisdom when the instruction does not match the drama of your season? This is where true sonship, true maturity, true spiritual depth are formed. Not when you obey only the grand commands, but when you cherish the whisper. And still, even when the test is small and the instruction is clear, the battle around it can feel strangely intense, almost out of proportion. And that is because the smallest battle often stings precisely where the final weakness still lives. Tiny tests can feel unbelievably irritating because they do not merely touch the surface. They reach into the last unhealed area, the remaining pride, the hidden impatience, the subtle fear, the final place where the old self still hopes for a vote. That is why you may feel unexpectedly agitated by something that seems on paper almost harmless. It is not because the moment itself is enormous. It is because the moment is pressing on something deeper than itself. A tiny delay can awaken years of frustration. A brief silence can brush against an old abandonment wound. A simple correction can graze a surviving pocket of pride. A small inconvenience can expose how much control you still want. The chosen one must not be confused by this intensity. Do not assume that because your reaction feels strong, the moment must be random. Often the opposite is true. The irritation is a signal. It tells you that the test has touched a live wire. It has found the final weak point before elevation. And that is not a sign to panic. It is a sign to pay attention. Every building creaks most at its pressure points. Every chain resists most at the last strong link. Every healing journey reveals itself at the place that still hurts when touched. So when a small battle feels strangely personal, ask a deeper question. What is this really touching? What does this irritation reveal? Is this truly about the moment? Or is the moment exposing something that has been quietly surviving underneath your spiritual language? This is where the chosen one becomes wise. Instead of merely blaming the inconvenience, you study the part of yourself that rose in response to it. You do not shame yourself, but you do become honest. Perhaps there is still a piece of you that wants recognition faster than God wants to give it. Perhaps there is still a need to be understood immediately. Perhaps there is still a fear that delay means denial. Perhaps there is still a little corner of pride that cannot tolerate being corrected, overlooked, or asked to bend. These are not discoveries meant to condemn you. They are invitations to deeper freedom. The irritation is not proof that you are failing. It is proof that heaven is gracious enough to expose what could have followed you upward and created greater damage later. Better for the weak point to be revealed in a small test than under the full weight of the next season. Better to feel the sting now than to fracture later under responsibilities you prayed for. So when the smallest battle feels absurdly intense, remember that it may be because the test is doing surgery with a needle rather than a sword. And because these moments are so easy to misread, the enemy desperately hopes you will wave them away as no big deal. That phrase has delayed more growth than many chosen ones realize. No big deal becomes the lullaby that puts discernment to sleep. It is how small compromises stay tolerated, how tiny lies stay unchallenged, how little resentments stay fed in secret, how brief acts of disobedience get excused until they become habits. Spiritual downfall rarely begins with a trumpet blast of open rebellion. It begins with tolerated cracks, hairline fractures in integrity moments the soul keeps labeling insignificant. A little bitterness here, a little compromise there, a little dishonesty, a little pettiness, a little disobedience disguised as tiredness, a little pride disguised as self-respect, a little delay in obeying what God already made clear. None of it seems large enough to alarm the untrained heart, but the enemy does not need a canyon when a crack will do. If a crack is ignored, pressure will widen it. If it is excused, repetition will strengthen it. If it is normalized, eventually it becomes architecture. That is why the enemy loves the language of minimization. It keeps the chosen one casual about what heaven is taking seriously. But heaven works in the opposite direction. Just as darkness benefits from tiny tolerated cracks, light moves through tiny moments of faithfulness, integrity, and surrender. A small truth told in private matters. A quiet decision not to exaggerate matters. A restrained word matters. A humble apology matters. A fast act of obedience matters. A private act of forgiveness matters. Tiny moments are not neutral soil. They are seeds, and every seed has a direction. It either grows toward corruption or toward consecration. This is why you must become reverent about the small. The enemy wants you casual. Heaven wants you awake. The enemy says it does not matter. Heaven says it is shaping you. The enemy says nobody will know. Heaven says your spirit will know, and your spirit is the very place being prepared for weight. The chosen one cannot afford to play with tiny fractures in this season. Not because God is harsh, but because the door is near. When the next season is close, little things matter more, not less. The final test is often small because it separates the careless from the consecrated. It reveals who is still drifting and who has become attentive enough to treat a whisper like thunder when it comes from God. And when that attentiveness matures into obedience, something beautiful begins to happen, because passing the test changes the atmosphere in ways the natural eye often cannot explain at first. The outer decision may have looked unimpressive. Nobody applauded, no crowd gathered, no dramatic soundtrack played over the moment. Perhaps all that happened was that you stayed simut. Instead of reacting, apologized instead of defending, waited instead of forcing, released instead of clinging, forgave instead of rehearsing the offense, obeyed instead of negotiating. It looked small, it felt almost hidden, and yet in the unseen realm, something shifted. Peace enters where warfare had been circling. Clarity sharpens where fog had lingered. Confirmation arrives with unusual gentleness. Movement begins. Doors that felt stuck loosen quietly on their hinges. Connections realign. Timing begins to breathe. This is one of the great mysteries of spiritual life. Massive movement in the unseen is often triggered by tiny obedience in the visible. The chosen one may not even realize immediately that the atmosphere has changed. You simply notice that your spirit feels lighter. The old friction is gone. The urgency that once pushed you is replaced by settledness. What was clouded becomes clear. What was delayed begins to make sense. What felt blocked starts to open with a strange elegance that effort alone could never create. This is because obedience brings alignment, and alignment changes atmosphere. The small test was never merely about behavior. It was about positioning. Once your response matches heaven's instruction, the environment around your life can begin cooperating with what God has been preparing. And many chosen ones miss this miracle because they keep looking for cinematic proof. But the shift is often quieter than that. It may sound like peace. It may feel like confidence returning. It may appear as a door opening without strain, a conversation resolving without force, a burden lifting without explanation. The point is not that you control the outcome by performance. The point is that private obedience creates room for divine movement that striving could not manufacture. This should encourage you deeply because it means you do not need a giant heroic act to enter the next season. You may only need to pass the small thing with reverence. And because that is true, what you must do right now is both simple and serious. Slow down. Pay attention. Stop despising little moments. Stop rushing through your days as though only the visible milestones carry meaning. In this season, every small decision deserves prayer. Every subtle reaction deserves awareness. Every quiet nudge deserves respect. The chosen one must become spiritually deliberate because the final test may already be happening. It may be unfolding in the way you answer someone, in whether you obey a whisper immediately or postpone it, in whether you let pride turn a simple correction into internal rebellion, in whether you choose peace over the need to win. This is not a season for autopilot. It is a season for prayer, self-control, discernment, humility, and immediate obedience. Pray before you react. Breathe before you sort of speak. Listen before you interpret. Submit before you strategize. Not because you are fragile, but because you're close. Pilots become more precise during landing, not less. Athletes become more attentive near the finish line, not more careless. So why would the chosen one grow casual when the final test is near? You must treat every small decision as sacred because it is revealing the shape of your readiness. Do not romanticize the big future while dishonoring the tiny present. The present is where readiness is proved. Ask God daily, what are you saying in the small? What are you asking me to release, resist, restrain, or obey? Show me where my reactions are still louder than my surrender. Show me where impatience is disguising itself as urgency. Show me where pride is trying to dress itself as wisdom. This is the prayer of someone who wants true promotion, not just visible change, because real elevation is not merely getting a bigger opportunity. It is becoming the kind of soul that can carry it without breaking under it. And this is where the final truth begins to glow with hope, because your next season is attached to this small test, not as a threat, but as a confirmation. The test is not here to destroy you, it is here to reveal your readiness. It is not an executioner, it is an examiner. It is heaven's quiet way of saying that the delay has not been empty, the pressure has not been pointless, the refinement has not been wasted. Once this hidden test is passed, so much of what felt confusing will suddenly make sense. The waiting will make sense because it was building steadiness. The pressure will make sense because it was exposing fragility before responsibility increased. The silence will make sense because God was training you to hear Him without constant external reassurance. The smallness of the test will make sense because heaven was aiming at truth, not spectacle. And then promotion arrives not as a random surprise, but as the natural next step of alignment. Divine timing has a beautiful way of making past pain readable. Once the door opens, you often realize that if it had opened earlier, parts of you would have entered it too raw, too reactive, too proud, too impatient, too easily shaken. But now something has changed. You are steadier, cleaner, more governed, less impressed by noise, more sensitive to whispers, more willing to obey quickly, more able to carry weight without demanding attention for carrying it. That is readiness, and that is why you should not fear the final test. You should honor it. Because what looks small now is standing in front of something life-changing. The hinge is small, but the gate is enormous. The key is small, but the room it opens is vast. The decision is small, but the season attached to it is greater than you can currently imagine. So take heart, chosen one. You are not being toyed with, you are being trusted. Heaven is not delaying you to frustrate you. It is finishing you for what is next. And if this test has found you, then it is because the next door is closer than it appears. Stay humble, stay awake, stay obedient in the small. Let restraint become strength, let tiny instructions become treasures. Let irritation become revelation. Let private faithfulness become your offering. Because you are nearer than you think, and the moment in front of you, however ordinary it looks, may be the final thread between where you have been and the life-changing season God is now ready to release. So let this settle deep into your spirit tonight. Heaven does not ignore the little things. What feels small to the human eye is often immense in the courts of God. The quiet reaction, the private surrender, the restrained word, the delayed response, the unnoticed obedience, the moment where you choose humility over pride, peace over impulse, trust over control, these things are never wasted. They are seen, they are weighed, they are remembered. And that is why this message matters so much for the chosen one. The final test is small only in appearance. It does not arrive wearing the costume of a great disaster. It does not always sound like thunder or look like war. Sometimes it slips into your day as a passing irritation, a silent disappointment, a moment of temptation, or a simple instruction that seems too ordinary to carry destiny in its hands. But eternal things often hide inside ordinary moments. That is the mystery of God's process. He uses what looks small to reveal what is actually strong. He uses what looks hidden to prepare what will soon become visible. He uses what feels minor to measure whether your spirit is truly ready for major weight. So do not despise this season. Do not mock the smallness of the test. Do not say, "This cannot be the thing that matters." It matters because God is in it. It matters because your response is shaping your readiness. It matters because the unseen realm is listening more carefully than you realize. Every small act of obedience is a signal. Every moment of restraint is a witness. Every quiet surrender becomes part of the evidence that you are prepared for what you once only prayed for. So remain alert. Stay disciplined in your reactions, humble in your posture, and obedient in the smallest details. Guard your words. Guard your spirit. Guard your habits. Guard the little gates, because large doors often swing on tiny hinges. Do not wait for a dramatic sign before becoming serious. Become serious now. Become attentive now. Become reverent now. Because the chosen one who honors God in the hidden places will never be abandoned when the visible season changes. And here is the final truth you must carry forward. The test is here and the door is near. What happens in the unseen will decide what appears next in the visible world. The private moment is shaping the public outcome. The small decision is standing in front of a life-changing season. So pass this test with peace, with wisdom, with self-control, and with trust. Heaven is watching, your spirit is being prepared, and what comes next will not be determined only by what you say you want, but by what you do when the moment looks too small to matter.